September 2, 2013. The quiet Polish town of Kielce suddenly became the center of the defense world. Journalists from DC to Tokyo were packed into the MSPO Expo Hall, staring at an object draped in heavy black fabric. When the curtain dropped, the room went dead silent. What stood before them didn't look like a tank at all. Sharp, jagged lines, matte gray panels, and a cannon hidden in a geometric shroud. The machine looked like a prop from a high-budget sci-fi flick. This was the PL-01. The global press exploded. The Guardian called it the most futuristic combat vehicle in history, and Forbes talked about a total revolution. Online, it was immediately dubbed the stealth tank, with everyone comparing it to the B-2 Spirit bomber. Suddenly, Poland, a country the world mostly saw as an agricultural hub, looked like a tech titan that had just leapfrogged the US, Germany, and Russia. To understand why the PL-01 caused such a shockwave, you have to look at what was sitting in Polish hangars in the early 90s. After the Soviet bloc collapsed, Poland was left with a massive inheritance of Russian hardware that was rapidly turning into scrap metal. Their backbone was the T-72, a 1960s design. Polish generals knew the score. In a real fight against modern Western systems, these old machines would just be rolling coffins for their crews. The armor couldn't stop modern rounds, and the accuracy was a joke. Upgrading would cost a fortune they didn't have. The Poles were stuck between a rock and a hard place. Their Soviet legacy was dragging them down, and they couldn't afford a fleet of American Abrams. That sense of technological desperation is exactly what drove Polish engineers to pull off the boldest and riskiest bluff in their history. The PL-01 didn't just appear out of thin air. It was Poland's third attempt to break free from the Soviet cage of tank design. The previous projects are mostly forgotten by everyone except military historians, but they taught the Poles a valuable lesson. If you can't win with pure tech, win with design. First came the Gorilla, the RT-94 project. In the early 90s, the Poles tried to build the Mercedes of tanks, a machine with Western electronics, a French diesel engine, and multi-layered armor designed to take a hit from a T-80. But the Polish economy at the time simply couldn't handle the ambition. The project cost billions, and all that's left is a wooden model gathering dust somewhere. Then, in 2010, there was the Anders. This time, they tried to be clever and create a universal platform, a chassis that could be a tank, an IFV, or even an ambulance. But the military just shrugged. It was too light for the front lines and too expensive for mass production. Twice, the Polish defense industry had made the same mistake, trying to catch up by copying everyone else's path. That's when the Obram Design Bureau realized they had to stop chasing and start jumping to where no one else was yet. They needed a tank that looked like it arrived from another galaxy. That's how the Ghost project was born. By 2012, it was clear Poland couldn't even build a mock-up alone. They needed a partner with a global name to bring some street cred to the project. They found that partner in the British defense giant BAE Systems. For the Brits, it was a perfect chance to test their experimental tech on someone else's dime. The alliance looked perfect. Poland provided the production sites and the political will, while BAE brought the brains, active protection systems, and the concept of adaptive camouflage. But there was one tiny detail they didn't mention at the presentations. To avoid building a tank from scratch, which would have taken years, the engineers used the chassis of a Swedish CV-90 infantry fighting vehicle as the foundation. It was a brilliant but dangerous move. On one hand, they had a reliable, proven platform. On the other, they were trying to build a heavy tank out of a light IFV designed to carry troops, not go toe-to-toe with an Abrams. It was a brilliant but dangerous move. On one hand, they had a reliable, battle-proven chassis that worked. On the other, they were trying to build a heavy tank out of a light infantry fighting vehicle designed to transport troops, not go toe-to-toe with an M1 Abrams. But in the heat of the pre-Expo rush, nobody cared. The goal was to sell an image the whole world would believe in, and the Brits helped paint a picture that looked flawless. So, why did the PL-01 look so alien? Every single line on that hull was designed for one thing: scattering radio waves. It's the same stealth principle used by the famous F-117 Nighthawk, swapping rounded curves for flat, angled plates so a radar signal doesn't bounce back to the enemy, but disappears into the void instead. The Poles brought that concept to the dirt. The entire tank was a collection of geometric panels that even hid the main gun inside a diamond-shaped shroud. No external fuel tanks, no ladders, no toolboxes. Nothing that could act as a radar reflector. Experts noted that with its radar-absorbent coating, this tank could theoretically sneak within visual range before any early warning system even blinked. It was an attempt to build a ninja tank, one that doesn't fight fair but strikes from the shadows. But beating radar was only half the battle. The real challenge was hiding the massive heat signature of a tank engine. The most talked about tech on the PL-01 was its adaptive thermal camouflage. Normally, a tank glows like a Christmas tree on a thermal scope because of the engine, exhaust, and sun-baked metal. Polish engineers claim they solved this with hexagonal tiles, small, wafer-like elements covering the entire hull. The system had two tricks up its sleeve. First, environment blending. These tiles could heat up or cool down in seconds to match the surrounding temperature. On an enemy's screen, 35 tons of steel simply turned into a patch of forest or a cold rock. Second, mimicry. The system could actually spoof a thermal silhouette. An operator could set the tank to look like a civilian car, a van, or even a group of pedestrians on the enemy's monitors. In promo clips, it looked like a literal cheat code, a tank driving through an open field that technically didn't exist to high-tech sensors. To seal the deal, they planned to cool the exhaust and vent it through the bottom of the hull to scatter the heat trail. The world was convinced Poland had just neutralized billions of dollars of Western investment in thermal optics. Beyond the stealth, the designers wanted to fix the fatal flaw of Soviet tanks, the crew dying when the turret gets hit. In the PL-01, the turret was completely unmanned. The entire three-man crew, commander, gunner, and driver, sat in a reinforced armored capsule at the front of the hull. They were separated from the gun, the autoloader, and the ammo by a massive armored bulkhead. This offered two huge payoffs. First, survivability. Even if a shell cooked off the ammo in the turret, the crew in the capsule had a real fighting chance to stay alive. Second, profile. Without people inside, the turret could be made incredibly low and narrow, making the Ghost even harder to hit. Tankers were becoming operators. Instead of squinting through traditional periscopes, they got the full picture on color LCD screens, creating a transparent armor effect with a 360-degree view. It was a gamepad tank concept, remote-controlled operations where crew safety was the top priority. The primary punch of the PL-01 was supposed to be a 120mm smoothbore gun, fully NATO-compliant. This meant it could cycle through any Allied ammo, from German sabot rounds to American heat charges. But the Poles took it a step further. The gun was designed to launch anti-tank guided missiles directly through the barrel, allowing it to pick off enemies at ranges standard tanks couldn't even touch. The autoloader sat in the rear of the turret, holding 16 rounds ready for immediate action, with another 29 stored in an isolated hull compartment. They promised a rate of fire of 6 rounds per minute, more than enough to create a literal hell on Earth for the opposition. For target acquisition, the fire control system featured an advanced hunter-killer algorithm. The commander would use a panoramic sight to hunt and tag targets, while the gunner just had to press a button to take them out, without wasting a second searching on his own. And for close quarters work, a remote weapon station on the roof could be fitted with a .50 caliber machine gun or a 40mm automatic grenade launcher to sweep infantry in urban environments. Despite having no windows, the PL-01 crew wasn't blind. The vehicle was covered in cameras and sensors, providing a complete 360-degree situational awareness. The gunner and commander had third-gen thermal imagers and laser rangefinders that worked through fog, smoke, or total darkness. The interface looked like something out of a high-end flight sim. LCD monitors highlighted threats and calculated ballistics based on wind and air temp in real time. At just 35 tons, nearly half the weight of an Abrams, the PL-01 relied on innovation to survive the meat grinder. The hull was wrapped in a ceramic sandwich, modular armor made of ceramic layers and aramid fibers. On paper, it was rated to stop 30 and 40mm rounds from any angle, with the front end beefed up to handle much heavier calibers. The big selling point was modularity. If a panel got hit, you could swap it out in the field in minutes. And as a final line of defense, an active protection system used sensors to track incoming missiles and blast them out of the sky before they even touched the armor. On paper, it was the perfect killing machine. But just as the world was getting ready to cut the checks, the details started to leak, and the hype began to deflate. The euphoria after the Kielce Expo didn't last long. Once the flashy headlines faded, People who aren't easily impressed by a cool paint job showed up. Career tank officers and independent analysts. That's when things got weird. One expert asked the reps from Obram and BAE to show him the internals, but he was hit with a firm no due to military secrets. When another analyst asked for real-world test data on the thermal cloaking, the answers were vague, claiming work was still in progress. These red flags were the first signs that behind the glossy facade, there might be nothing but air. The truth turned out to be more than just bitter for the Polish defense industry. It was humiliating. The tank of the future was, in reality, nothing more than a non-functioning mock-up. Beneath those futuristic gray panels, experts discovered the slightly modified chassis of an old Swedish CV-90 infantry fighting vehicle. The entire space-age look was nothing more than plastic molding glued over old iron to create a pretty picture for the expo. The turret was a total dummy. The main gun couldn't physically fire a single shot. And that legendary thermal cloaking, it existed only in PowerPoint slides and marketing reels. The Russian press was among the first to mock the project, sarcastically noting that the PL-01's stealth worked perfectly. The tank had completely disappeared from reality as a combat unit. Western experts were more measured, but their verdict was just as crushing. The very concept of a tank built on a light IFV chassis was dead on arrival. First, there was the protection issue. You can't make a 35-ton machine take a hit like a 70-ton Abrams, no matter how many innovative names you give your materials. Then, there was the layout. A front-mounted engine is standard for an IFV, but it's a bad call for a tank because it eats up the critical space needed for heavy frontal armor. Finally, the firepower. The low-recoil 120mm gun they planned to use was significantly weaker than a full-size tank cannon. In a duel with a real main battle tank, the PL-01 would have been erased by the first hit. Defense Minister Tomasz Siemoniak, who had just been promising mass production by 2018, suddenly started backtracking, talking about long-term prospects and research. The project became a political liability. In 2016, the Polish Ministry of National Defense quietly killed the project. The official word was a shift in priorities. Instead of building their own tank, Poland decided to buy used German Leopards and American Abrams. The money spent on the mock-up and the aggressive PR campaign essentially went up in smoke. Critics estimated those funds could have bought dozens of actual battle-ready tanks. The fate of the lone PL-01 prototype is grim. Rumor has it, it's rotting in a backlot at the Obram facility in Gliwice. Photos leaked online show a neglected shell with its panels peeling off, revealing the old Swedish chassis underneath. The ghost had finally vanished from the radar. It seemed like the end, but in 2022, the story took an unexpected turn. Poland signed a massive deal with South Korea for K2 Black Panther tanks. But the real kicker came later. The Korean giant Hyundai Rotem unveiled its own tank of the future concept, the K3. Visually, the K3 is almost a clone of the PL-01. Same stealth profile, same unmanned turret, and the same armored capsule for the crew. Rumors started flying that the Poles had handed over all their ghost documentation to the Koreans. In the end, the story of the PL-01 wasn't a total failure. It was a premature vision. Polish engineers caught the right trend. They just didn't have the resources to turn it into heavy metal. Now, with Korean capital and tech, that vision might finally come to life as the K3, and Poland plans to be a key partner in building it. Sometimes, you have to lose the battle to win the war.